Hey everyone, Box Gods here from Monsoon Cooling, and today we're going to be taking a look at our new EV2 compression fittings for rigid tube. Like the originals, EV2 is available in two sizes, a 3/8 by 1/2 inch, which is 13 millimeters, and a 1/2 by 5/8 inch, which is the 16 millimeter. To speed this video up, for the rest of the video I'm going to be just referring to them as the 13 millimeter and the 16 millimeter. EV2 is also available in all 10 of our Monsoon color finishes so that they perfectly match our full range of rotaries, light port rotaries, pumps, our modular reservoir systems, stop plugs, everything. This is the chrome and the blue. Black and white, purple and gold, black chrome and green, orange and red. Before I get into the unboxing and installation instructions, I want to take a few minutes to go over some of the design improvements we made between the original and the new design. First thing you'll notice is the outside diameter. It's a little bit problematic if the outside diameter is too big, because if you have a block that has very tight port spacing, you sort of run out of room. So the first thing we did was decrease the outside diameter on the new design by about 20 to 25%. On the 3/8 by 1/2, the outside diameter is now 20 millimeters, and on the 1/2 by 5/8 or 16 millimeter, the outside diameter is now 22.4 millimeters. While I've got it flipped over here, I can also point out the height difference. We almost doubled the height. The height of both of the 13 and 16 millimeter fittings is now 17 millimeters. That's the installed height. Basically from the bottom of the fitting right here to the top is 17 millimeters. The way the originals worked, and the way most push-in fittings on the market work, is that they use a rubber seal, there's an O-ring inside there, that forms a seal on the side of the tube. And then there's a rubber, call it expansion band. And what happens is you put the tube inside, and this band would be in there, and as you tighten down the compression ring, the band would squeeze down on the side of the tube. What that did was basically create a seal, and then gave it a little bit of resistance to pull out. But the problem you would find is that the tube would have a wobble inside the fitting, which, although it's not the end of the world, it's just also not all that great. The other problem that they had was that the tube could be pulled out far too easily. Sometimes it could be pulled out when you didn't really want it pulled out, with a little kid messing around inside the rig or something like that, or you're traveling with it to a LAN. What we've done in the new design, I don't know if this will focus, but down inside there you'll see that there are now two O-rings. So it is a double seal from the O-rings, and we replaced the original soft rubber compression band with a true hard plastic ferrule. I'll have a diagram of this later so you can see it more clearly. What that does is it gives you 3 points of contact in the tube. There are two seals, and then a hard ferrule that actually is driven down onto the tube by the compression ring and gets a really good grip on it, so that you get much better resistance to pull out. I'll be going over all of this later on with a graphic that makes it a little more clear. It's a lot easier to visualize if you can see what's going on inside. So here's a cross section of the fitting to give you a better idea of how it all works. At the top we have the compression ring, which is shown in yellow. Next is a hard plastic ferrule shown in red. Then inside the base we have the upper and lower O-rings, which sit inside grooves. These are what actually create the seal. The hard plastic ferrule has a conical shape, and it sits inside a matching chamfer in the base. When you insert the tube in the base, a dual seal is created by the upper and lower O-rings, and then when you tighten down the compression ring, it drives the ferrule into the sides of the tube, which creates a really strong grip, and you get a much better resistance to pull out. We're talking 4 or 5 times better on EV2 than the original design. Okay guys, time to do a little unboxing. This is the retail package. This is a 12-pack EV2 by Monsoon. Start with the part number, EV2 for economy version 2, 1/2/5/8 for the size, which is 1/2 by 5/8. It also happens to be 16 millimeter. 12P for 12 pack, and then the last two digits are the color code. In this case it's CH, which is chrome. If these were red, it would be RD or BL for blue, etc. Alright. This video is going to be a little more stream of conscious, what I call Elon Musk mode, where you sort of just ramble about whatever you're thinking. Alright. First thing you notice, this is a 12 pack, so it has two trays. If this had actually been in the 6 pack, this is what you'd see right here instead. On the top you can see a red bag of parts, two little black bags of parts, a white bag of parts, and a wrench. Take the bottom tray and set it aside. Open this up. All kinds of goodies. Alright, get all this stuff out of the way. First things first, this is the sizing template. This is really important because this is one of the things that really sets the EV2 fittings apart, because you're going to get a really good fit on the seals and on the ferrule that keeps the tube in place nice and tight and gives you much better resistance to pull out. Let me set this aside for a minute. The first thing I'm going to do is warn you guys, do not open the parts bags until you have determined your tube size. This is the 1/2 inch, the 1/2 by 5/8. If you were looking at the 3/8 by 1/2, the template for it actually has 3 sets of parts. It has a yellow bag, a purple bag, and a green bag. You'll understand all that when we get into the instructions part a little later. But again, do not open or mix the contents of these bags. It's really important. Make sure you have read the instructions. There are instructions on the back of this card. There is a downloadable PDF of instructions, and then I'm going to go over installation on this video. So do not open these bags until you have consumed at least one of those sets of instructions. There are 2 bags that have G1/4 O-rings in them. Because this is the chrome set, both bags are black. If this had been a colored set like blue, for example, if you had blue fittings, one of the bags would be black like this one of the bags would be blue. Because there is no colored chrome, you get 2 black bags of the G1/4 O-rings. Those are the ones that actually go on the bottom of the fitting, just like every other fitting you've ever used. And we have a wrench. Again, last warning, don't open or mix the contents of the colored coated bags. Alright, we're going to go ahead and get right into the installation while we're here. Just going to take one of the fittings out and get rid of these so we got a little more room to work. I talked about earlier, my biggest goal for the design of these fittings was to really improve the seal that we get, the quality of the seal that we get, and to dramatically improve the pull-out resistance of the tube. It's one of the things that worries me the most, because when I was pro modding and traveling to different LAN events and trade shows and things like that, the computers would be boxed up into crates, shipped across the country. There's just nothing in the world worse than opening up the box at a show the night before and there's a gallon of water in the bottom of your case. If you reach inside and you're unplugging a SATA plug or something like that, or a Molex, and it pops loose and you hit a tube and it pulls it out, water pours everywhere. It's just, obviously, for just dramatically obviously reasons, it's not a good thing. So that was the primary goal with the new revision of our economy fittings, was to really improve the resistance to pull out. And how you do that is basically looking at the difference between soft tube and hard tube. Rigid tube is an extruded tube. As a process, the way rigid tube is manufactured, it's done by extrusion, which is just not very accurate. Most factories will give you a guaranteed tolerance of plus or minus 3 to 5%, which is pretty substantial size variation. You'll also find that the tube between different manufacturers and even between batches, there's quite a bit of variation. That was never a problem with soft tube, because you just make the barbs a tiny bit bigger, and then the tube would stretch to go around them, no matter whether it was a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, it was fine. We just can't really get away with that with rigid tube. And if you're using a push-in type fitting, in order to make that work, they have to sort of make the fittings, the seals in them, slightly oversized to sort of compensate, and that's why you don't, you know, sometimes you get a fairly nice fit, sometimes it's not quite as tight. With EV2, I wanted to make it so that every build, every fitting, every connection that you make is perfect. And how we do that is we went out and looked at a lot of different tubes from a lot of different manufacturers. We measured everything. I'm actually missing one here. Hang on real quick. These are actually engineering reference samples that we machined. And these are, there's actually one more package of them that I can't find, but they run from, if you look on the front of this card right here, it says this set of fittings will fit tube outside diameters 15.2 millimeters to 16.2 millimeters. And what these engineering samples let us do is we were able to develop different size seals and ferrules for different size tube requirements. Okay, I tracked it down. So we've got 15.6 millimeters to 15.8, 16.2 to 16.4, 15.2 to 15.4. That covers the whole range. And what we did with these, basically, if you look at I'm going to open up here and show you real quick. These are actually engineered and are machined and then polished to a very specific size. One end of them, I don't know if it shows, but it's hollow and it simulates the tube, and then the other end is solid so that we can chuck it into a jig that we have that we can use to measure pull-out resistance. What you're actually going to do, very first thing, on the template itself, first on the back side there are instructions. I need to make a correction here on the step number 1. It says carefully install O-ring into the groove inside base. It should read install the O-rings into the grooves inside the base, or the 2 O-rings into the grooves in the base. I will correct that on the next printing. But what this lets us do basically is there's a notch here. This is a sizing template, and on each side of the notch there are little color zones. In this case there are red and white. As I mentioned earlier, if you're using the 3/8 by 1/2 13 millimeter tube, or 12 even, you can do, it has 3 colors, a purple, yellow, and green. What you're going to do, it's pretty basic. There's a notch, you slide the tube into the notch, you pull the tube towards the bottom, don't push it too hard, you don't want to deform the template, and you're going to look at the side and see where your tube hits. In this case I'm hitting right almost exactly between the 2 marks. Anytime that you have a situation where your tube does hit between the 2 marks, use the larger of the 2 sizes. In this case that's the red for me. So I'm going to be using the red parts bag. So the very first thing I'm going to do is take the white parts bag, put it somewhere in a drawer or something like that out of the way and safe, to make sure that I don't ever accidentally mix up the parts that are inside that bag. So let's see what's inside the bag. We don't really need the template anymore, so I'm going to set that aside because I know I need the red parts bag. I got the fitting that I'm going to be using, a wrench. This is my simulated tube, I guess we'll leave it out here. I already explained to you the reason why there are 2 bags of the G1/4 O-rings. These are the clear bags because we have a chrome fitting. There's just 2 bags of black. I only need one. I'm going to take one of them, put them out of the way. While I'm thinking about it, I'm going to go ahead and put the G1/4 O-ring on the bottom. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the O-ring is clean, there's no damage on it. You want to make sure that the groove on the bottom of the fitting is also clean. You just put it on there and just carefully stretch it over the fitting. This is just like you've done on every other fitting you've ever used. The difference is inside we have 2 O-ring seals. I've already installed them on this one. I'll show you what's inside the bag. Basically lots and lots of O-rings and the black plastic ferrules. This is one of the ferrules. I'm going to set it aside. And these are what the O-rings look like. I've already got them installed in that fitting, so we don't need to do it. I will go over how you install those. I'm not going to lie to you guys, the first one that you do, it's a little bit difficult and you're going to be cussing at me. It's probably going to take you 5 minutes. The second one you do will go at about half that time, and by the 3rd or 4th one you'll have it down and they go pretty fast. Normally we would install the O-rings in the fitting so you didn't have to mess with it, but because we're trying to just really get the ultimate fit, You're going to have to determine which tube, size you need, which bag you need. It's not the same. Just because you buy 16 millimeter tube doesn't mean it's going to be exact 16 millimeters, like I covered earlier. To put the O-ring, the two O-rings down inside, you can either use a pair of tweezers or a what I would call a pointed but not sharp item, like a toothpick where you've blunted the point off of it. You can also take a Q-tip and snip off the fuzzy head of it. I like to use, I don't have it here, but I use the little Allen wrench that comes with our reservoirs. But here we go. This is what I normally use. Basically, you're just going to pinch it together, shove it down in there. Install the bottom one first. One area of concern that you'll come across, the bottom O-ring, there's a groove, and then right below that there's the flange where the tube rests. I wanted to make it so that it was really obvious when the tube bottomed out, because that's kind of important. Make sure you don't accidentally install the O-ring down in that flange. You'll be able to tell when you've got it in there correctly. So after you've got that done, the next thing I would recommend is that you take either a tube reamer that comes with our cutting kits and knock the sharp edge off the bottom of the tube. You don't ever want to have, with any brand of push-in fitting, you don't ever want to have a sharp edge on the bottom of the tube, because if you try and shove that down into the seals, it will damage the seals. So you want to either take a tube reamer and ream the end of the outside edge of the tube off so it's not sharp, or you can use wet dry sandpaper. This is 600. 400 is probably about right. You can see where I've done this before. You're basically going to take it and just sand on that edge until you've rounded off the sharp point. I also recommend that you take, when you've got your tube all ready to go, take the ferrules and the tube over to your sink. Use hot water and warm, or at least warm water and dish soap. Wash the ends of the tube. Wash out the inside of the ferrules with the soapy water. What that does is it just gives you a slightly better grip. You can think of the oil from your fingers as you're working on your parts acting as a little bit of a lubricant that makes it slide easier, which in this case is something we don't want. If you do wash these parts off, make sure in your sink you put a washcloth or something over the drain so that you don't accidentally have the ferrules escaping down the drain. Don't laugh, it happens. One other thing is never ever use Windex or a glass cleaner on acrylic tube. It will cause the tube to crack. Really, just use dish soap and hot water and you'll be all set. So we're going to assume that I have cleaned off the edge of my tube, I have washed off the end and the ferrules, my O-rings are nice and clean and installed. First thing I do is, you can't see it here, but I'll just wet the end of the tube with a little bit of spit. Don't use any kind of lubricant for the same reason we just discussed. Oops, got ahead of myself. First, slide on the compression ring. You're going to slide the ferrule on. The compression ring that I slid on, I have the thread side towards the fitting or the end of the tube. On the ferrule itself, it's probably not going to show up in the camera, but if you saw the diagram I showed you earlier, there's basically a long face and a short face. You want the long face facing towards the end of the tube. Slide right on like that. I've wet the end of the, oh wait, I totally got ahead of myself again. We need to install this into the block that we're going to be using. I got my O-ring on, everything's clean. I'm just going to finger tighten it. The wrench will work two ways for this. If it's in a hard to reach place, or if you're one of those types of people that tends to overly aggressively tighten things and blow out threads, you can use the wrench this way. It's just like a screwdriver basically, and tighten it down. If you're a little more careful, it will also work sideways like this. Be careful, this gives you more leverage and it makes it a lot easier to strip out threads. You basically just want to get it good and tight but not go crazy. Alright, back to where we were. This goes in here. When you push the tube inside, you're actually going to be able to feel both detents because it fits really good. There's the first one, there's the second one. The tube is bottomed out. You can just feel how that fits in there. By the way, that's already created the seal. If I was to hook this up and run it, it would just run without leaks perfectly. This is basically how most of the push-in type fittings work. It's basically an O-ring that seals on the side, or in our case, two O-rings. You can already tell they're pretty snug. The next thing you do is tighten down the fitting. Again, we've already created the seal before we even put the compression ring down, so the only purpose the compression ring serves is to lock the tube in place. So you really just don't have to go crazy with that. So you're just going to tighten it down until it's snug, and then a little bit more. You can kind of experiment around with it. I can tell it's really tight right there, and I'll just give it a little more. That's all there is to making the connection. If you do use a little bit of spit, you might want to wait like a half hour or so for it to evaporate, but I can already tell. I mean, I could pull that out if I pulled really hard, but it's in there. This fit isn't as 100% guaranteed as our hard lock fittings, because those use the lock collars that are bonded on the end, which is a little bit extra work, and some people just don't want to mess with it. So this gives you almost as good pull-out resistance without the extra work of the compression with the lock collars. That about covers it. Just remember, don't mix the parts from the bags. Be careful to get the bottom O-ring actually in the groove and not sitting down on the flange. Oh, one more thing I wanted to cover before we sign off with this video is that there is an option that you can have for the fittings, which is etching. I'll go ahead and throw a graphic up here so that you can see it, but basically what the etching does is you can take your designs. The design that you're looking at, it was done by Jeremy at Performance PCs, but what it allows you to do is take your design, whether it's a clan name or a gamer tag, your girlfriend's name. If you're doing a sponsored build from ASUS or NVIDIA or whatever, you could throw their logo on, you know, the Superman logo, just whatever fits the build that you're doing. It will let you etch that design right onto the fittings. Basically how that works is there's a SKU for it at Performance or your reseller. You'd order the fitting color you want with etching. They will send you an email that has a template with a box that you can use to fill in. It's basically a little gray box. There are some instructions on there and some do's and don'ts. You put your artwork and the design in the box. You email it to us. In about 7 to 10 business days, you get your fittings back. That about sums it up for today, guys. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you can email me right here. Have a good day.